So I'll just do a quick intro, a little bio about Richard Roberts. So he's got over 35 years of experience in the installation, sales, commissioning, and product management of code-compliant commercial fire alarm, carbon monoxide, emergency communications, and security systems. He is responsible for codes and standards development at the federal, state, local level, as well as legislation. So he currently sits on 14 NFPA technical committees, 2 UL standard technical panels for carbon monoxide. He's a member of numerous ICC fire code action committees. He's a board member of the International Association of Fire Chiefs and Fire Life Safety Section. He's a member of the National Association of State Fire Marshals. He's a board member of the Center for Campus Fire Safety and board member of the Safer Building Coalition. He's chair of the Safer Building Coalition Government Affairs Committee. And finally, he's a chair of the National Electrical Manufacturers Association, or NEMA. So I welcome Richard Roberts and thank you for taking the time to run through some code, and the focus today is going to be on mass notification. So without further ado, and other people can join in as they come in, Richard Roberts. Thanks, Richard. Take it away.
All right. Thanks, Dan. Can everyone hear me clearly?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. So I really appreciate the opportunity to speak today. And, I hate to say that this is a webinar or a presentation. I'd really like it to be more of a discussion. So if you have questions, don't hesitate to ask. As Dan said, today we're going to provide a basic introduction into mass notification and emergency communication systems, as well as providing an overview of the key requirements in NFPA 72 and several changes that were made to the 2015 and 2018 NFPA and ICC model codes that are intended to enhance the life safety of building occupants. So I guess it would probably be nice if I shared my screen, right? Dan, you should have called me on this. Richard, you ding dong. So
there you go.
All right, everyone can see my screen.
We can see it.
Yes, sir.
All right, let's put it in presentation mode. All right, so the learning objectives today is pretty straightforward. I'll start by explaining the concept of mass notification or emergency communications, and take a few slides to look at how it evolved. Then I want to review the history and development of these systems in NFPA 72, as well as covering some of the key requirements that are in NFPA 72. And, I've already used the terms mass notification and emergency communication several times already. And, these terms are used interchangeably. The most common term probably is mass notification, but there are some distinct differences between them. So I'm going to take a couple slides to review that. Then I want to get in and cover some of the key requirements relating to voice intelligibility. Now, keep in mind, I'm not going to get into explaining how to lay out an intelligible system, because that could be a 4-hour course in itself. But, there are some key sections, provisions in NFPA 72 that deal with that, and I think that's very important to mention today. Then I want to get into reviewing the NFPA 72 requirements that permit a general public address system to be used for voice communications of a mass notification system. As we get into that, it'll be interesting, but really I think that that's kind of a niche application, which I'll get into. but I do get a lot of questions about that, especially as it relates to, retrofit of an existing building. And then lastly, and probably most importantly, I want to provide an overview of several changes to the 2015, 2018 ICC and NFPA model codes that really talk about mass notification. So, as I said, Q&A, don't hesitate to, interrupt me if you have a question. But as you can see, we got a lot to cover in, a little over an hour or a little under an hour here. So let's get started by explaining the concept of mass notification and look at how it evolved. Now, mass notification began from the inability of emergency responders to communicate with each other and to direct building occupants during all types of emergencies. And a mass notification system is really more than a public address system that provides pre-recorded messages inside a building or sending out blast text messages. And the overall purpose of these systems involves an integrated effort to save lives and minimize injuries during all types of emergencies. Now, that could be a fire condition, it could be natural disasters. In the Northwest, you have earthquakes, okay? Here in the Midwest, I'm based in Chicago, you have tornadoes. Also, unfortunately, acts of violence, okay? Or it could be something like chemical spills in a industrial plant. So, mass notification is really defined as a technology that provides real-time information to groups of individuals that are within a building or multiple buildings. It could be a campus style settings. It could be an entire geographic region, or it could be worldwide. I mean, a company like Honeywell, right? With well over 100,000 employees globally, we could employ mass notification. So, and it provides all of these notices, through voice messages, all right, inside or outside building, visible signals. It could be strobes or it could be digital signage. Yes, text messages or blast emails. It could be tactile or other communication methods. So it's really, pretty far reaching in terms of what you want to do. So the genesis of mass notification got started from a U.S. military incident that occurred overseas. And this incident occurred in June of 1996, where a U.S. military building located in Saudi Arabia was bombed by a truck that was carrying, I think, over 5,000 pounds of explosives. Now, this building housed about 2,300 American military personnel. Tragically, 19 people died and there was over 370 people that were injured. Now, this incident caused the U.S. Department of Defense to make rapid changes to its emergency planning by creating a new Unified Facilities Criteria document specifically for mass notification. Now, this UFC document outlines the design operation required for a mass notification system in military bases, buildings within or outside of the United States. Now, you can go to this link here at the bottom of the page and get a free copy of that document. So, I would strongly encourage anyone who is doing work for the military to, download that document. Also, there are other Unified Facilities Criteria documents, and one relating specifically to fire alarm systems. So that's, very important. So since this tragic event that occurred in Saudi Arabia, it's really sad to say, but there have been just countless other high-profile acts of violence and severe weather. You know, I started this presentation, back in 2018, and the rapid increase of active shooter events has just, as we all know, significantly increased. So, but I mean, this kind of gives you a little snapshot. You know, going back 4 or 5 years ago, you know, things were occurring about once a year. And as I said, now it's almost once a month, if not once a week. So how did mass notification requirements get into NFPA 72? Well, the process started in June of 2003 when the Air Force petitioned the NFPA Standards Council to establish a mass notification project. Now, the Air Force wanted NFPA to spearhead this important project for several reasons. First, a fire alarm system is a very effective platform for mass notification because it's highly regulated and extremely reliable. You know, the installation, testing, maintenance requirements for fire alarm systems are well established and have been for decades. Also, you know, the fire service, they should be anyway very familiar with the operation of a fire alarm system. Also, you know, NFPA, I mean, they're world renowned for bringing together all different types of stakeholders to develop new standards or create a new standard. And lastly, using a fire alarm system as a platform for a mass notification or emergency communication system avoids the additional cost of installing and maintaining multiple systems. So even though it was launched by the military back probably a decade or more ago, these systems are now being driven by national consensus codes and standards. So mass notification, it first appeared in the annex of the 2007 edition of NFPA 72. And it's important to remember, annex material is not part of the mandatory requirements of an NFPA code or standard. Instead, annex language is intended for informational or explanatory purposes only. Also, you know, if you get a new concept or a new technology like mass notification back in 2005 and 2007, it's not uncommon that you put these new requirements in the annex, and to get these requirements out as widely as possible to receive feedback during the next revision cycle, when you may end up you know, taking them from the annex and putting them into the body. So after the 2007 edition of 72 was published, the NFPA Standards Council created a technical committee to begin work on the development of a brand new chapter of 72. And this new chapter was in the 2010 edition of NFPA 72. And it's chapter 24. And the title of this new chapter is Emergency Communication Systems. And this new chapter 24 has requirements for an array of systems, including mass notification. So, you know, before we start looking at the requirements in chapter 24, let's just take a slide or two to really understand what a mass notification system is and how it differs from a emergency communication system. And as I said, you know, these terms are really used interchangeably. However, they are quite different. So if you look at mass notification here on the left, okay, it's used to provide one-way information and instructions to people in buildings or other structures using voice messages, visible signals, text messaging, graphics, or other communication methods. Now, as it relates to emergency communication systems here on the right, in addition to providing one-way communication systems, they also include two-way communication systems. So the takeaway here is NFPA requires an emergency communication system to be classified as either one-way or a two-way system. So this slide actually is out of the annex, okay, and it really provides a nice illustration of the various emergency communication classifications. And as you can see, it's really divided into four sections here. In the first section on the left, colored in beige, it applies to one-way systems. Now the second here that's in light green, it covers two-way in-building emergency communication systems. This third section here, it provides requirements for the communication methods and equipment used to send and receive these signals between the protected premise and central control stations. And of course, these first two sections here, very prescriptive requirements that is typical of NFPA 72, but obviously, you know, over here, I don't know where that went, but there are performance-based requirements. So let's just take a quicker look, you know, on one-way emergency communication systems, okay? And the first classification here is your, what I would say, traditional in-building fire alarm voice evacuation system. This is a traditional fire alarm voice system that is required in high-rise occupancies as well as larger assembly occupancies. And these requirements have been in NFPA 72 for decades, okay? So really nothing new, but it's in building fire evac. Now, the second type is an in-building mass notification system. And many of the requirements have been correlated or picked up from the Department of Defense's Unified Facilities Criteria document. Now, another type of a one-way emergency communication system is a wide area mass notification system, and it provides real-time information to people outdoors using a public address system. You know, these systems are typically used in campus-style settings or, you know, military bases, okay? You have people walking to and from different buildings. It could be kids, students at a university having lunch or breaks outside, okay? If there's any kind of a disaster or an emergency, obviously you want to communicate to those people. And lastly, you have a wide area distributed recipient mass notification system. That's a tongue twister. And this is intended to communicate directly to targeted individuals or groups of individuals via email or texting. Now, these people may be in a single building. It could be a group of buildings. It could be across the entire geographic area, or it could be worldwide. Now, it's important to point out that these distributed mass notification system, distributed recipient, should not be used in lieu of where there are prescriptive requirements in Chapter 24 for audible and visible notification appliances. However, they should be integrated into any kind of a mass notification or emergency communication system whenever possible, because they really could provide some additional information. Now let's take a minute and look at two-way emergency communication systems. And they give emergency first responders the ability to communicate and exchange information with each other as well as building occupants. Now, I would say maybe 5-10 years ago, the most common two-way system was your wired firefighter telephone system. And these types of systems were typically found in high-rise buildings such as hotels, office buildings, or apartment buildings. And you would always have your fireman phone jacks at the elevator lobby or maybe even by the stairwell, okay? But in recent years, fire departments and other emergency responders rely on radios to communicate with each other during all types of emergencies instead of being, I guess, chained to a wired telephone system, okay? And these systems are called a two-way radio enhancement system. And of course, the last one here is your area of refuge or area of rescue assistance, some people call it. And this is where people who are unable of self-rescue can gather and communicate with emergency responders during an evacuation or other type of emergency situations. Now, these areas are generally located at stairwells or near exits, and they are required in the building code. So a little legal housekeeping here for myself. And before we actually get into looking at the requirements in NFPA 72 and the 2015 and 2018 model codes, I want to point out that, yes, I'm on all these NFPA committees, all right? But the comments and opinions expressed are mine only. They do not represent the official position of the ICC, NFPA, UL, or any of the other committees. Also, I want to point out that you can go to nfpa.org or iccsafe.org and purchase a copy of the applicable code or standard that is adopted and enforced in the jurisdiction or jurisdictions that you do business with. All right, thank you for your patience on that. Somehow. So looking at somewhere I'm missing a slide here. Well, I'll wing it. So, introduction, intelligible voice. Apologize for this. Okay, so let's discuss voice intelligibility. All right, I mentioned that a few minutes ago. It's really imperative for individuals within buildings to clearly understand the voice message so they can take appropriate action to remain safe. Now, designing an intelligible voice system, as I said, is challenging even for experienced designers. Therefore, I'm not going to get into the details of laying out an intelligible voice system. Now, NFPA 72 has required that an in-building fire alarm voice evacuation system, it has to be intelligible since the 1999 edition, but it never mandated a specific level of intelligibility or a method for measuring it. So that begs the question, are intelligible voice messages really needed in all rooms, areas, or spaces of a building? Well, the answer is probably no. I mean, for example, should an intelligible voice message or messages be required in storage rooms, mechanical or electrical or elevator or equipment rooms? Well, in a perfect world with unlimited resources, the answer is probably yes. But realistically, probably not. So changes were made to the 2010 edition of NFPA 72 that permits the system designer to identify the areas of a building to be provided with intelligible voice messages. And it accomplishes this by dividing the building into defined spaces, and these are called acoustically distinguishable spaces, or ADS. Now, the concept of these acoustically distinguishable spaces came out of an NFPA Fire Protection Research Foundation study on how to design and measure voice intelligibility. So what is an acoustically distinguishable space? Well, looking at section 336, it may be a different section number with newer editions of 72, but this is out of the 2010 edition. It defines ADS as a defined space of a building intended to have an emergency communication system notification zone, and each zone is distinguished from other zones based on different acoustical conditions. So that provides the definition for an ADS. So now let's go to chapter 18, and the scope of this chapter covers all types of notification appliances that are connected to a protected premise fire alarm control unit. And this is where voice intelligibility requirements are first referenced. So if you look at 18.4.10, all right, it specifies that voice intelligibility is only required in ADSs that are required to produce an intelligible voice message. Looking at the next section, 18.4.10.1, it requires the system designer to identify all the ADSs during the planning of an emergency communication system. And 18.4.10.2, it requires the system designer to determine which spaces, if any, will require intelligible voice messages. Okay, so I think that's pretty clear. It's really up to the system designer working in conjunction with the building owner and the local authority having jurisdiction to determine where voice messages need to be intelligible. So let's turn our attention to chapter 24. And as I said, this is the emergency communications chapter, all right? And section 24.3.1.1, it requires emergency communication systems to be capable of reproducing pre-recorded or live voice messages with intelligibility in accordance with Chapter 18. And of course, the key word here is capable. It's not just mandating intelligible voice messages be provided everywhere, okay? Rather, it's saying it must be capable, and it refers back to Chapter 18 on the criteria for intelligible voice messages. So NFPA 72 permits either a qualitative or quantitative measurement to determine voice intelligibility. Now, qualitative measurement is based on a subject-based method that really involves an individual or groups of people in a space, area, or room listening to the voice message and determining if it is intelligible to them. Now, a quantitative measurement uses a meter to determine voice intelligibility. Section 18.4.10.4, all right, does not require an instrument-based measurements using a meter to determine voice intelligibility. However, if quantitative measurements are required, then you got to go to 18.4.10.5, and it refers back to Annex D for how to accomplish that. And of course, Annex D241 states the intelligibility of an emergency communication system is considered acceptable if at least 90% of the measurement locations within each ADS have a measured STI or CIS score. Now, I will say, to my knowledge, okay, the vast majority of times, the local AHJ will determine if that voice message is intelligible. I will say the military, they do require a meter, or in other words, quantitative measurements. Sorry, I had to get a drink of water. So another important aspect to remember about emergency communication mass notification system is that pretty much every facility is really unique and has specific risks. And a facility's stakeholders must clearly understand all the potential emergencies that could occur and design a system that accounts for them. Now, the key to understanding and defining these risks is to perform a risk analysis before beginning to design and install an emergency communication system. And Chapter 24 of 72 is very explicit about requiring a risk analysis for each facility. Looking at 24.3.11.1, it specifies that each mass notification system shall be designed for the specific nature and anticipated risk. The next section requires the system designer to consider both fire and non-fire emergencies when determining the risk tolerances. And lastly, section 24.3.11.10 requires a risk analysis, to be used for the development of an emergency response plan. So, what is this risk analysis? Well, let's go back to chapter 3. That's the definition sections. And here again, you may not want to just, this number may have changed here in newer editions of the code. Most likely it has, but it defines a risk analysis as a process to determine the likelihood, vulnerability, the magnitude of incidents associated with all types of disasters and emergencies. And it seeks to determine their likelihood and their potential consequences. So continuing with the requirements relating to a risk analysis, going back to chapter 24, 24.3.12 specifically, it requires an emergency response plan to be developed in accordance with two NFPA documents. The first one is NFPA 1600. This is the standard on disaster emergency management and business continuity programs. The other one is NFPA 1620, and it's a recommended practice for pre-incident planning that's part of the design and implementation of a mass notification system. Now, these two documents will help to provide people with a better understanding of the requirements and elements of an effective emergency response plan. So, as you can see, this risk analysis is really an important component, the central component, I would say, in designing an effective mass notification or emergency communication system. And it should be well documented, okay? So it can be reviewed, evaluated by all of the relevant stakeholders, and it can be referred back to later in the future. And of course, Chapter 7, this chapter provides one central location in NFPA 72 for all documentation requirements, and there are several sections that relate to a risk analysis. The first one, 7361, it requires the findings of that risk analysis to be documented. 7362, it requires that risk analysis documentation to be maintained in accordance with paragraph 77, and that provides the requirements for the record retention and maintenance of all fire alarm and signaling system documentation. So, you just can't write something down on a note paper, and that's your risk analysis, and then stick it in a drawer. You really want to have a good, thorough risk analysis evaluation and make sure that it's maintained properly. Now, in NFPA 72, back in the annex, there is a checklist, all right, that can be used as a template for initiating the thought process for identifying the hazards in a facility. And I think it's a 2 or 3 page document, but I just took a screenshot of, the first page here. So, and just remember, I'm repeating myself, but, annex material is not mandatory. So, this is just for reference. So the takeaway here is every mass notification system is unique, and therefore there's not a one-size-fits-all solution. And a risk analysis should involve all of the relevant stakeholders. Now, that's the question that I often get. Well, what is a risk analysis? Who is supposed to be involved? And, all of us being involved in fire alarm and signaling systems, we're very accustomed to having extremely prescriptive requirements, okay? Well, really, this is more of a performance-based requirement. So what do I mean by all relevant stakeholders? Well, it could include, but not limited to, of course, the AHJ, the executive leadership of the building owner or their designated representative, the insurance company, of course, law enforcement, EMS personnel, the architect, the consulting specifying engineer, of course, the system designer, okay? And yes, you may even want people from the weather service. I think that that would be important. So really what you want to do is bring together everybody that would respond to any potential emergency, bring them together and start identifying the risk and how and who should be, how that message should get out and to who it should get out to. Now, another area of considerable confusion, even today, 10 years later, and misinformation is whether a mass notification system is permitted to automatically override the fire alarm system in terms of the notification or the messaging. And really, again, it goes back to the risk analysis. It's the central point that determines the priority of a mass notification message, and it's used to develop the emergency response plan. So the risk analysis will identify what emergency situations, if any, will take priority over a fire alarm evacuation signal. So if you go to 24.5.13.1, it's pretty clear, at least to my mind. The mass notification priority levels shall be determined by the emergency response plan. Of course, the emergency response plan is developed from the risk analysis. Looking at the next section, it permits the mass notification system to override the fire alarm signal if the findings of that emergency response plan determine that it's acceptable. And 24.5.13.3 stipulates the priority of all other messages shall be determined by the emergency response plan. So this is, back in 2013, it was probably new, relevant information, but not so much nowadays, but it is worth mentioning. And, if you go to section 10.3.1 of NFPA 72, it requires all equipment that is used for fire alarm and signaling systems to be listed for its intended purpose. And as it relates to control units that are part of a mass notification system, section 24.3.10 requires it to be listed as complying with these two product standards, UL 864 and UL 2572. And UL 2572 is a relatively new document. The first edition was published in October of 2011. And, the products covered by this standard are intended to be used in combination with other appliances or devices to form an emergency communication or mass notification system. All right. Everyone has heard me pontificate now probably for about 20, 30 minutes. Any questions? Going once, going twice, nothing. All right. So, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, mass notification control units are required to be listed to UL 2572, or an in-building fire evac system has to be listed as complying with UL 864. However, there are certain applications where a commercial grade public address system or a pro audio sound system that's not listed to UL 2574 or UL 864, it may be permitted for delivering mass notification messages. So that kind of sounds counterintuitive to what we've all been taught and what we all believe in. So let me explain. If you look at section 245241, it requires a public address system that is being used to deliver mass notification messages to be evaluated by the emergency communication system designer to determine compliance with Chapter 10. Now, Chapter 10 provides the secondary power requirements and the supervision requirements for a fire alarm signaling system or an emergency communication mass notification system. The next section, it requires the system designer to demonstrate that the PA system meets the goals of the emergency response plan and provides equivalent performance with the prescriptive requirements. And the key term of this paragraph is equivalent performance. Now, the findings of the mass notification or the mass notification risk analysis may demonstrate equivalent performance even though that PA system has no secondary power supply or does not supervise the speaker circuits. To meet the secondary power requirements, the PA system would be provided with an external secondary power supply. Now, if the PA system is used constantly by trained personnel, it could demonstrate circuit supervision. All right, so let's just take example, an airport. And the reason why I bring up an airport, Denver Airport, okay? Several years ago, they upgraded or actually installed a mass notification system there. And instead of ripping out all of the speakers, all of the amplifiers throughout the facility, they felt that since the paging system, the public address system was being used constantly, somebody would know very quickly if there was a problem with a speaker circuit. Now, let me stress, NFPA 72 is only permitting non-UL 2572 PA systems to develop or to deliver the mass notification message for certain applications, okay? And as I said, ideally, I think this could be for retrofit applications. Another application I think is a good one could be public schools, okay? So looking at 24.5.25, it provides the requirements for interfacing this public address system that is delivering the mass notification messages with the fire alarm system. 24.5.25.1 requires the public address system to be interfaced with the fire alarm system to cause deactivation of the fire alarm system's audible and visible notification appliances in accordance with 24.5.221. And I'll review the interface requirements in a few slides. Now, this deactivation will only occur when the risk analysis, again, going back to the risk analysis, has determined under what conditions the mass notification message will be permitted to override the fire alarm signal. Now, looking at 24.5.25.2, it requires all of the following features to be provided in or added to the public address system. Number one, emergency messages must have priority over non-emergency messages. Makes sense. All individual or zone speaker volume controls must default to the emergency sound level when used for emergency mass notification messages. Number three, when monitoring of circuit integrity is provided by the public address system, monitoring must continue even if the loudspeaker volume controls are placed in the off position. And number 4, the required visible notification appliance network, in other words, the strobes or text signs, must be provided where required. So looking at 24.510, it provides the requirements related to the operation of the public address system by authorized and trained personnel. Needless to say, it's imperative that only authorized personnel have access to a mass notification system, and access should be determined by what? The emergency response plan. So if a PA system is being used for voice communications of a mass notification system, 24.522.1 requires an interface with the fire alarm system, and it requires the interface to be listed in accordance with what? 10.3.1, which requires all equipment installed uh, to be listed for its intended purpose. Now this section here requires the interface to manage the signals to and from the public address system and the fire alarm system. So it's got a lot here. I think in the interest of time and the fact that this is being recorded, you can probably review that at a later date. So if the interface is used to broadcast non-emergency messages over the fire alarm notification appliance circuit, 24.522.14 requires the operation to comply with the requirements of 24.515 and 23.8.4. Now, if you look at section 24.515, it covers the requirements for adjusting the volume of the emergency messages, and 23.8.4 provides the requirements for combination systems. And of course, a combination is a fire alarm system that is used in common with non-fire alarm signaling systems. Any questions? Either everyone's asleep or I'm doing a really good job.
You're doing a great job. Hey, I had a quick question for you. I've got a situation with a pool facility, and in the pool area, all the hard surfaces, the water, they want to go to mass notification. They have no notification in the pool area, but they do have a digital PA system for announcements. And our thinking was that I've done it in the past on Navy projects or in schools. There's a couple schools on the peninsula. That's the only way they do it, is to run the fire signal for the pool area through the PA system. Now, what you just described there is not something I've come up before, where they've said you've got to have redundant power, etc. Is that something that's open to interpretation to the HJ?
I think it's crystal clear. Okay.
Yeah, it sounded like it was.
Yeah, but as we all know, the AHJ, has the final decision on what products or systems are to be installed in their jurisdiction. So, if the AHJ says, you don't need a secondary power supply, then all right, get him to sign off on it. All right. So,
okay. All right.
CYA. Same thing with the supervision. I mean, what are you going to do about if you know that those circuits, if they're not automatically supervised, you got to provide a method to determine that they are operating properly. And just thinking off the cuff here, if it's a pool area, you may have only trained personnel or authorized personnel has access to that system. Then, maybe they test it before every time they use it, So I don't know, it's I think the requirements are pretty clear. And, even if the AHJ signs off on something that doesn't comply with 72, I'd still be a little leery of that, because, if there is any kind of a fatality, the U.S. legal system, they just bring in, sue everyone. So
Sure.
All right.
All right. Thank you.
Great question though. So let's look at some of the key changes to the 2015-28 IFC IBC. And the first change that we'll look at is the 2015 edition of the IFC IBC. And it will increase the safety of students and faculty in newly constructed K through 12 schools. And, this change was needed because in recent years, we've seen a huge increase in acts of violence committed against students and staff. So for the 2015 codes, fire alarm systems installed in newly constructed K through 12 schools are required to utilize that in-building emergency voice evac system for occupant notification instead of using horns. And a voice system is only required where the occupant load of that school exceeds 100 people. And of course, we all know that using an evac system for occupant notification has a lot of benefits over just using a horn. You're able to provide pre-recorded or live voice instructions throughout the school during all types of emergencies. And you can use that in-building fire evac for other types of emergencies as well as non-emergencies. So if you want to use the evac system for daily paging classroom changes, you can certainly do that. It's permitted. Now, switching over to the 2018 edition of the IFC IBC, the first change deals with, again, an in-building fire evac system, but this relates to a high-rise occupancy. And, as I said earlier, as we all know, the code has required these evac systems in high-rise buildings since probably the late 1970s, early to mid 1980s. But for the 2018 codes, a new section was added requiring a multi-channel evac system in high-rise buildings. Now, this change provides the capability for distinctive recorded and live voice messages to be sent to various areas of the building at the same time, which should help expedite and coordinate occupant evacuation. And of course, one of the benefits, as I said, of an evac system is it can be used for non-fire emergencies and non-emergencies. So, it's saying a multi-channel voice evacuation. It doesn't say how many, but you got to have more than one. So here's a big one. It's intended to protect students and faculty in colleges and universities during all types of emergencies. And the proposal was initiated by the Center for Campus Fire Safety after the Codes and Standards Committee surveyed the membership. And based on feedback from the center's membership, they said they wanted direction in the model codes relating to mass notification for higher occupancies. Now, I should have mentioned the survey that went out. It wasn't just surveying what changes they wanted for fire alarm systems. It had to do with anything and everything relating to higher ed occupancies. Okay, so it could be passive fire protection. But by far, the number one thing that came back was they wanted direction on when and what type of a mass notification system to be installed. So, as I said, the codes, they really provide no direction as to when a mass notification is to be installed. Yes, Chapter 2472 specifies how to design and install these systems, but it does not mandate their installation. So for the 2018 code, a new building that's part of a multi-building college or university campus is required to conduct a risk analysis that's in accordance with NFPA 72. Now, the risk analysis is only required for a new building when the total occupant load of the university is greater than 1,000 people. Now, if the completed risk analysis indicates that a mass notification system is warranted, for that occupancy, then a mass notification shall be provided in accordance with the findings of the mass notification system. All right. So let's take a few question for the group. And this is in the interest of time. Do any of your customers or do you serve any areas that adopt and enforce NFPA 101, or is it just all the IFC and the IBC?
Military adopts 101. I know that, and some of the schools do too.
Okay, all right. Well,
Medical.
yeah. Well, as it relates to a risk analysis for mass notification systems, NFPA 101 has essentially the same requirements as what I just covered for the IFC and the IBC. Obviously, the way NFPA 101 is laid out, it is a little different, actually quite a bit different. All right, chapter 9 here, that's your core chapter, which means nothing until an occupancy chapter refers back to chapter 9. So as it relates to the occupancy chapters in NFPA 101, high-rise buildings, you have to conduct a mass notification risk analysis for high-rise buildings. As it relates to new assembly occupancies, okay, same thing, mass notification risk analysis. New educational occupancies, 101 requires that. Dormitories, same thing, it requires it. New mercantile, and of course you got college and universities with classrooms. Now, I've went through very quickly quite a bit of information, okay? And there is additional information that you can utilize. Number one, system sensor application guide for voice evacuation systems. Yes, system sensor, we're a manufacturer, but this is not a product guide. It just provides generic code-related information, all right? And you can download the PDF at no cost. NFPA, it has a very good document designing mass notification systems. You can get that via PDF or hard copy, and I think NFPA members, the cost is either a little below or just a tick above $100. NFPA 72, again, there's just a wealth of additional information in the annex. And of course, NEMA, the National Electrical Manufacturers Association, they have a publication, SB 50, and it's the Emergency Communications Audio Intelligibility Applications Guide. So this will help in designing an intelligible voice system. So with that, I guess I'll turn it back to Dan Moore. Also, if anybody has any questions, I'm available to ask them. Also, if you have any questions in the future relating to mass notification or fire alarm and signaling systems, carbon monoxide, don't hesitate to send me an email. Here's my email address. Actually, I really enjoy this part of my job because more often than not, I'll get a question that I hadn't thought about or I forgot, and it really forces me to open up the code books and read. So I really utilize this to keep me up to speed on what's what's going on in codes and standards, and I enjoy it. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dan.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. I know we went over a little bit, but it's great that we got everything in. I appreciate your time, and I know Kevin had to drop off, so but he sent you a little note saying he appreciated it. So
okay.
Thank you, Absco, for hosting. Thank you, Chad.
Of course.
And we can certainly do this again. If you guys, if Absco, if you wanted to stay on with me for a little bit, I know Casey, you said you had some questions on CLSS. If we wanted to chat about that, or at least set something up for, for the next couple weeks that I can get together with you guys on that. But anybody else have anything for Richard before he jumps off?
I just wanted to thank you, Richard. You are very good at this, and I don't know how you have time for emails with all the boards you're on, and I'm sure dozens and dozens of meetings. I don't know how you do that, but we're glad you do, and it was very, very valuable. People are already asking for a recording of this, so we'll make that available. So thank you again for your time.
Yeah, I really enjoyed doing this. I don't know if it was you or someone else asked about that pool area, but here again, that's an application that I didn't think of. So I always learn something. So, if you guys are interested in doing more in the future, I'm for it. Now, Dan, he may not want to listen to me pontificate more, but that's up to him.
Never get tired of listening to you, Richard. Come on.
All right, gentlemen, I got to
Thank
go.
you all.
Have a safe and enjoyable holiday weekend.
You do the same.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Richard.
Thank you for joining, everybody.
See Ryan Rude there.
Thank you.
See you, brother.